bring this forward. Hello, world. Patricia O'Connor. I'm glad the light went up. Patricia O'Connor here, and Frida Reba Darcy. She is just out of frame, and I think I have the solution to that. Tonight is Saturday Night Live Bonsai on the Bonsai balcony, and you don't see a tree here. Well, actually, there are a couple of little Japanese black pines sitting over there on the little corner table by themselves. They're just hanging out, and they're hanging out close to my two favorite bonsai books: the Little Book of Bonsai by Jonas Dupois and Bonsai Heresy by Michael uh, Hagedorn. Uh, those are my two. Those are my two literary recommendations when it comes to bonsai. Here is the payoff for my dog trying to get her to come a little closer to the show. And I'm not gonna dangle it or nothing. I'm just gonna sit it over there and see how long it takes her to come into play. But enough of all that. Uh, Ali, tonight on the show we are going to talk about wiring. Uh, I love I love sometimes I've had really good luck wiring, and I'm kind of known for doing some really pretzely tight bends and stuff on pine trees. And I've was I kind of thought that would be fun, something fun to do, but I can't take full credit for it. I like to watch my counterparts in Japan and on Bonsai Q. Yeah, Bonsai Q. I was watching like 2 summers ago. Somebody just take these little trees and just absolutely just wrap them up in the little twist, and I just was blown away by that. And so what I decided to do was take some of my little pine trees and just wrap a wire around them tight like a spring all the way up, and then take the tree with a wire wrapped around it and wrap the tree around a fulcrum. In this case, most cases, a fulcrum meaning a stainless steel chopstick that had a couple of different thicknesses on it. If I wanted to make a slightly fat Cheerio, it would be this part. If I wanted it to be bigger Cheerios, I'd use the fatter end of the chopstick. But all that kind of works together, and I was able to get some. We got some really cool little trees. All right, fine. We got some really cool trees out of all of that when it was said and done. So maybe if I do that. So I have always enjoyed wiring, but I also know some of my counterparts don't. Like I watch the Bonsai Zone quite a bit. Totally not into wiring even a little bit. Won't even put a a line going down to the side of the pot or something. For a guy wire. Uh, but that's just clip and grow, and I do clip and grow. It's I don't think it's one for me. For me, it's not one or the other. This is the tool that you use to do this. This other is a tool you use to do that. And some people are clip and grow only, and some people are not. And personally, I don't think the tree has a decision making process, and wiring is kind of like feeding. It's kind of like growing. It's kind of like clip and grow, or kind of like any of the other part of it. Repotting, you do it well, and it helps you to bring your trees along. And it's just for me, it's another tool to have in our arsenal. And I like having, I can just go with metaphors all day long. I like having as many arrows as possible in my quiver when it comes to having things to work with. So a couple of things just off the top about wiring. Um, wire Run the wire in the direction that you intend to bend. Don't wrap a wire this way and then bend the branch this way. Doing that will cause your wire to gall out as you go. What you want to do is wrap your wire one way and then bend the tree that way, so that if all things being equal, the wire will tighten as you come around with your bend. The other thing, and sometimes this changes with the degree or how hard it is to bend, but I find that I do better when I'm mindful. Well, one, have a fulcrum point. I went out to the yard today and collected a limb that I pulled out of a tree while I was walking free last week. I did that based on the fact that this was a maple big branch, and I just cut these off of it. But I pulled this off walking free last week because it was hanging in the tree, and I am the 6 foot tall thing with orangutan size, could go out of frame arm. So I was sitting there looking up at that, and I thought, been hanging there for 6 months. I bet I can reach that because it was, you know, head high, but it was about 20 feet out there. But we were looking at a slope. So I thought, well, by the time you get on the slope, you might not be able. But I got that out of the tree and threw it on the ground for the landscapers to pick up. And then today I was going, I need some material for our show today. And I bet the landscapers never picked that up. So I went out and got it and cut it up into pieces. And this is what we're going to work with tonight. I've also got some scissors that I don't think I'll need, and I've got some printers, and I've got some pieces of wire that were used in case I need them. And I have these things. For demonstrational purposes, I have these guys. These are called gear ties. You would kind of use them in a lot of ways. You would kind of use these like you would use maybe a zip tie, or maybe you would use a piece of wire to help you bundle something up. Except they're soft rubber. Get used to this, Pat. They're soft rubber, and they're reusable. You know, like if you were going to bundle up, you could bundle up anything with it. You could bundle up socks with this before you go on vacation. You can bundle up all of your cables for your computers or for your gaming stuff, or for your electrical business, or all your cords or all your extension cords or whatever, with gear ties. But they also come in brightly colors. And I saw this and thought, well, this is demonstration material right here for a bonsai show. Okay, so I guess we'll start with this little guy. Let's say uh, something else. Copper or aluminum. When it comes to the pines and stuff like those guys, when it comes to the evergreens, copper is kind of considered to be proper. Um, do what you can afford. Copper costs more. You can use a piece of copper, or if you go with aluminum, it has to be like a third bigger. No, you can do with a third of the copper what you would do with aluminum. That's how you say that. You can do with a third of the copper what you would do with aluminum, and have the bend stay. It's harder sometimes to bend. I've had copper start to get hardened up on me as I'm running it in there. Hi, Paul Krause. How are you doing? By the time you get to the end of something, and you're at the end of it, and you have less leverage to work with too. But like I was starting with earlier, when I'm bending a wire, I like to think of it going. First of all, you want to start with an anchor. Go with the bigger wrench for that little part of the discussion. So maybe I'm going to work on this. So I'm going to come down here, and we're going to give ourselves an anchor. That's this guy. And this is what, if you've watched, if you have watched the tried and true bonsai shows out of Japan, out of England, with You probably have heard a million times about the two branch method. And that's basically to say that we use this branch to anchor, and then we use this side to do our business. Now, something else, and as you get confident, you get better at this. And when you're unconfident, this is the thing that you kind of do that shows. I just broke that tip, but that was dead material. 45, I think, is the degrees of angles that you kind of want these bends to be right here. These coils are on a 45. If you get those out at 65, then you might do that, or you might psychologically find yourself doing that because you're not confident about wrapping the wire in there without damaging the material. So you kind of stretch that wire out a little bit, so that instead of doing it in 10 dangerous laps, you do it in 6. Well, that is still going to be way, way, way less holding power, and you may get away with it only to find that the limb gets a little girth to it or something and straightens your work back out. So you want these coils to be fairly tight so that there's enough wire on here that when you do a bend, it'll stay. Now, I don't really know how long this has been dead. It was hanging from a tree for quite some time, but I'm just going to bring this in there. Let's say not this could snap all to be, but if it were green, I'd have a shot at it. But for demonstrational purposes, let's say I wanted a bend right here. I'm going to look at this piece of wire where it comes across, and I would like the apex of my bend. I would like the direction change, that hard direction change, to be right here. Now, I might have known that I was going to do something like that when I wrap this wire around here. I might have looked at this spot and just been dodging buds as I went, and then still trying to make sure that my links here stay tight enough to facilitate the bend, right? But at the end of the day, if I thought about it, if I knew I wanted a hard bend right here, I would want this bend to be here so that it would back up what I'm about to try to do, which is as I bend this bend right here, I'm going to want this bend in the wire to back up, like running along my spine as I like fold up and try to kiss my heels or something. You're gonna have that wire backing up that bend all the way. And incidentally, I heard that thing snap as I got about a third of the way through there. But okay, but even then, you can see where the snap is, possibly. It's too small. But the snap where it gave up was right at the apex of where my wire is. And now this piece of rubber with a tiny piece of wire in it isn't going to be the support that the proper piece of copper wire would have been in that situation. And this being dead wood, it wasn't going to behave with the kind of bend I was trying to do. But still, in all, I think the point's still valid. So that's lesson on that. Now, some people will discuss wiring an entire tree and then going back and doing their bends versus wiring a limb and bending it, and then wiring another limb and bending it. You can almost look at that like a personality type. When I thought about that the very first time, I thought of what I would usually do if met with a pile full of seafood that had to be cleaned. I wouldn't clean, eat, clean, eat, clean, eat. I would clean a bunch of stuff and then be the envy of the restaurant while I kicked back and then ate all of that stuff. So I kind of almost looked at it like that and went, so I would wire the whole thing, but I've learned what I think is better. I mean, there's two different rules of thought all the way down, and this isn't necessarily better. But when I heard the alternative to this, I went, yeah, that's reasoning more than just doing the disciplinary part of doing the wiring and then going back over and getting the enjoyment part of bending. I could also see from a systematic standpoint to do one thing and then do one thing and then do one thing is is more systematic and you can maintain your rhythm as opposed to starting and stopping, doing one thing, going to another, and then starting over and going back to that one thing and then doing another. So I was leaning towards and justifying the idea of going through and wiring the whole tree. And what I've come to know and what I've been told and what I think actually makes the most sense, having thought about it, is your bottom branch. That sets that's your first move. That's the first one right there. When you set the bottom branch, everything else rotates off of that. So having said that, I'm not going to know how to wire the second branch, third branch, fourth branch, back branch, what until I've already set motion into that bottom branch. You wire, you set the bottom branch, and that tells you what you're doing to the second branch. And then with that knowledge, you carry out that wire. And that's been the method that, despite my first thoughts, made the most sense in in the long run. Uh, Now, anchors. A lot of times, if you see the seedlings and the stuff that we bent this past year, I would just go nuts on some of these guys, on some of these pine tree seedlings, be they ponderosa or be they Japanese black pine. Those young seedlings had a lot of vigor, and could take a lot of abuse. So what I would do is take a wire and run it all the way down to the bottom of the cup, stab it through the bottom of the cup, and then bend that off. So that wire is well and truly got some anchor and it's going through all of that substrate and then it comes up here to where the tree is, before it breaks the surface. But then I know I can go to town with this wire and it's not doing anything crazy below the surface. It's fastened to the side of the pot. If I try to do something like this, and I've just stabbed it down in the bottom of the pot while I'm wrapping this around. This might be acting like a sling blade underneath the surface and just uh, going to town on the roots. So that's to be considered there. Uh, I used to have a problem. What I would do is I would come in from the top. And the reason I would always come in from the top is, say the trunk is here. I would want to come in at a really hard angle and then still make my way to the bottom of the pot. And I would still want to try to make this piece come out of a hole that I'd cut. I could never hit that hole. And I was always doing it in front of y'all with the camera running. So y'all would sit there and watch me fumble around. And finally, I think Elizabeth was like, Jesus, give it up, Pat. Go through the bottom and go up through the hole. And that is a lot easier. Now I kind of had to give up this part, but I can make that happen once the wire comes up anyway. I can still make that happen. But that tends to be my first move. Bring a wire up from the bottom of the pot through a hole, break the surface. After it breaks the surface, say this is your trunk. Take the wire to a hard angle and come at it that way, because when we get done, we're going to take this part where it comes out of the ground and we're going to make our hardest bend. Unless we're doing a formal upright, This is your on a seedling. This is your time to get motion, and the more motion, typically the better. You may think otherwise. If you think otherwise, do less. But for by and large, I tend to regret not putting enough motion in young trees going in more so than I've ever regretted. Oh, yeah, that's got too much motion. I don't know. I'm just not made that way. So that's what I would say. If you can get that where it comes out of the ground, if you can have that going in more than one direction, up to three, that's fantastic. If it's going this way, and coming around a little bit, just comes out of the ground doing that, then that nobody will ever can ever accuse you of you having a straight, flat, boring tree. You know, year one, you've done a great job. So that's what I would say. Even if you're just looking at a seedling in a styrofoam cup or something, you can run a wire up through the bottom and you can get a tree started on some really, really, really cool stuff. Here's something else that's fun to think about when you've got a tree that little. If you're going to do a tree from seed, or you've got something that's kind of close to a seedling, when you get a wire going all the way around the trunk, grab it by the bottom, grab it by the top, turn your bottom halfway around, turn the top halfway around, and you will have done a full twist in the length of that tree. And in that little tree with green and brown and maroon bark on it, won't even notice. Years from now, when that thing starts to bark, it will have maintained that membrane structure or that pattern, and it'll come out. It'll be dramatic, and that's just something that's just people will know a long time from now that somebody would have done that a long time ago on day one, and that'll just be that's kind of like a really cool I was here moment when you did that on one of your trees. I got some other things I've forgotten already, but I've got something else here. This is an example. Guy wires. Guy wires are a pretty good way to bring down limbs. A lot of times a branch will come up and try to do one of these things. So if you can put a line around it and pull it down, um, the more they hang down, the more they look like they're heavy, or that denotes age. So in past, people have used the wires that they use to stabilize the tree in the pot. Maybe they'll go below the surface and scratch up where they can see one of those wires, or a lot of times on my trees when they have them, you can see those wires on top. Um, and they'll just kind of go in there and loop their guy wire on that, go up to that branch, pull the wire over, pull the branch down as much as they dare, pull that wire tight, and then put a couple of twists in it. That's a great way to do that. What if you don't look and see a good place to attach the other end of your fulcrum? One thing I've found that you can always use if you don't see anything else is you can take a butterfly clip from an envelope. I'm going to use this really small pot. I didn't want a big pot laying around to kick around. But you just literally do that. And now I'm going to run my wire through there, go up to my branch, pull it down, and cinch it off. And that's that way I could pull, and that's how you would do that. Oh yeah, I remember the other thing that we were ready to go at. I'm glad I had that worked out just right. Letting wires dig in. Some trees, when you wire them knowing full well that the trees are going to swell out, swell up, grow quickly, and will bite into those wires and will leave wire scars. You learn going in that wire scars are bad. No, not to. You don't want wire scars on your trees, and that is quite often the case. There are times when wire scars are not something that you worry about. Um, when they are something you worry about, excuse me, I can tell you that there's something to be concerned about when it comes to my cork bark oak. I had a couple of branches and I thought, I'm going to experiment and see what happens if I let a wire scar, if I let it swell up in there and then uncover it. Will it, will it swell up in between the wires and then balloon back out and even out and be fat? No, it will not. It will carry that for a long time. I think the same thing with maples. So you want to watch your wires whenever you wire something, and if it looks like it's in like my bald cypress, those scars take a minute to get over. So when I'm looking at especially new growth and I've got it wired and I've got it going the way I want it to, and I see that it's starting to look like it's getting ready to start digging in, there's a couple of ways you can go about it. Unwire it and then wire it back. Just don't go back into those tracks. Go beside those tracks, above those tracks, below those tracks, down the tracks, up the tracks, whatever, but just don't go back into that trough and rewire it. Another thing is you've got something that's got a kind of a complicated bend on it and you're worried about that. I've lost shape that a branch was holding by unwiring it before, even when I was going back and rewiring it and I didn't quite get it back. I've had that happen. So what I would recommend in that instance is you take a second wire and you wrap that guy alongside, which is what you were going to do with it anyway. You were just going to cut the other wire first. And then when you've got that in there, it's a little bit more trouble to cut out the old wire when you've got that new one in. But when you cut the old one out, your tree isn't going to jack in the box out. You're not going to lose some of the tightness to the work that you did earlier. If that matters to you, that would be a way around that. Go ahead and throw that second wire on there before you take the first one off, and then go back and take that first one off. When it comes to wiring stuff that's green like that and is going to it's not going to stay on there a really long time, that'd be a good time to be thinking about the cheaper aluminum wire. Remember, you're going to need more of it. If you're looking at an instance where you're going to be wrapping wire around more than one branch, perhaps you know that going in, and you might take your branches together. So I would take two wires, take two wires. Let's see, that's what we're going to do there because I'm holding it all. And I'm running them side by side. We come up. Now, this guy, now I would have already decided which way I wanted to bend this branch before I ever started going this direction. Also, it helps to think of bending this wire in this way. Go this way, go this way, go this way, and go this way. And by thinking about it and actually deliberately pulling on it in such a way, you are affecting the tightness to the trunk or the tightness to the bark. And we want it fairly tight. People sometimes, I think, will tell you to go, I'm going to hold off 1 second, to tell you to go looser because it's going to grow into it. That's ineffectual wiring and you can do damage. You can do damage by doing your bends with loose wires, and the time you're saving before it grows out, you should just unwire it and start over because there are places where it's still going to grow out and cause that issue. Now, why did I stop here? All right, this branch, if I were going to bend this branch down, I would not want to run this wire this way, because as I run it, just going around and show you what I mean. So I came around here and I ran underneath the bottom of this branch. That's fine if I'm going forward or back or up, But if I go down, but if I run this wire underneath the armpit or the crotch of that branch, what that does, so that's me doing this big bottle thing here with it. And then as I try to bend that branch down, that's going to blow out right here. So if you're going, part of your bend is going to be to go bend that down. Let's not run under the bottom all nice and neat there. Go over the top, and then run it over the top, basically, is what I'm saying. Then we'll be able to do this all day long without having this wire become a fulcrum and break our branch, which would blow out here on the top of the shoulder. Okay. Now, what if I don't have a second branch on the two branch method? Then that's just a full wrap around the trunk. That is a full wrap around the trunk to anchor. And I say a full wrap because if you just kind of go just a little hook, a lot of times it'll try to slip out of that like a bad wrestling move. And if it does, it'll leave a scar. So when you don't have a second branch, just use the trunk. These things are actually pretty cool. So that is basically, I like to use copper. The more I get into this, the more I like to use copper. And of course you don't see trees in the wild with wire on them, of course. But that's also part of it. If you do really nice work with copper, it does look good, but that's kind of superficial because it doesn't, if you're looking at the copper, that's, you know, not natural necessarily. But the other side of that is it does turn a dark brown color, and to uh, it tends to blend in really well with your evergreen, and so that's kind of, and it just looks nice. It just look well done. Copper just looks nice on a tree in my mind. So those are some of the notes on wiring trees. It gets easier as you get better. Um, I didn't totally learn on videos in front of y'all. I practiced quite a bit. I would practice on stuff that the landscapers left behind. I would bring in pine limbs and wire them. I've also seen people take branches and clamp them to their table. Just, you know, set branch there, clamp it. Kind of a take what you get kind of a lesson, and then sit back and look and go, okay, it's attached to a tree like this, and I got to deal with it. What would I do? Um, and then they would go out and wire that thing. So you can learn a lot like that, and you can kind of make some of your own mistakes that way. Some things, mistakes. That's a good one. Mistakes I've made. Probably, I would say I've had wires slip from not being anchored correctly and take out tender foliage before. I've lost an apex on a tiny little mame cypress tree that I was making a big deal about at the time by having a wire slip because I hadn't anchored it well. And it didn't grow another one. Well, that was the beginning of the end for that poor little guy. Um, so yeah, you want to make sure that your anchors are well set. That's kind of goes back to what I was saying about run it through the bottom of the cup and bend it up, or make sure that you're using the trunk with the full wrap, or make sure that you've got the two branch system by Peter Hahn had so prolifically pronounced the two branch method. Other things to consider is some trees you can get away with bending quite a bit. Like, for instance, I'm just gonna, I haven't even gotten wire on here, but on a Japanese black pine, if I'm bending it and I see it break the skin right there, and I've got wire on it and I see it break the skin, that doesn't mean the branch is gonna die. Far from it. It doesn't even necessarily mean I stop bending. It means I keep watching that and I see that I just make sure it doesn't open up too much or that I don't see any like strands of fiber starting to get all freaky deaky. I can stop. Just if I see a little crack in here, that's no big deal on a Japanese black pine. They can redistribute whatever it is that's moving from their vascular system, front ways, sideways, up and down ways. If you break a fiber in here, it can transfer that load over and take it on. Not so with other trees. If you crack my cork bark oak for all of its tough ruggedness, it is the least forgiving of anything I've ever tried to bend. My cork bark oak is the tree that I basically at some point decided that, you know what, we're just going to go clip and grow and see how that goes. Now, I'm not so hard and fast about that that if I feel like I'm missing out on anything that I would stick to that. But I do think that you can't do half clip and grow necessarily and half wired. If you've got some kind of weird S motion going in a branch and then you've got another one that like, well, that looks odd. So you have to be fairly consistent with what you do. But I'm up for still for using everything. But I have found that for me, I didn't get away with bends very much. I found it uh, they would bite in really quickly, probably because I was feeding them and our weather's really good. But it seemed like the wires weren't staying on there very long before they were having to constantly be moved. And they were constantly, I've had them straighten out my wiring job before. And somebody would say, well, you didn't go with heavy enough wires. Well, if I would have went with heavy enough wires, I would have destroyed the stuff that I was wiring when I wired it. A month later, it's moving that stuff. So yeah, maybe your luck would vary, but I found that my cork bark oak was, for the most part, a pain in the butt to wire. Uh, Maples, not hard to wire. They do want to bite in. You don't want to let them bite in, and you don't want to see any scars. Now, this brings us back to when you can see scars. I had a pine tree some years back, and whenever I started cutting back some of the choices on this puppy mill variety pine tree, I would cut a limb and see that there were little metallic circles inside that cut where it had grown around the wires that were applied to it, and those wires had been left in there. And I was like, gads, these guys did a horrible thing by leaving the wires in there because of all the things that I had just discussed with you in my first couple of rounds of bonsai. It didn't involve a lot of pine trees. So later, what I've seen is that on pine trees, some people will keep exactly to that same code of ethics that I was just mentioning. You take them off, replace them, run another one beside them, and then take the old one off or something before they scar. Other people will say, no, those scars, those not scars, those those wiring trenches, those wiring marks will cause the tree, and I'm a big fan of this. I'm not saying this is some method I've heard about. I'm saying this is what Patricia has come around to. What I will do on the pine trees is I will wrap those wires tightly around those guys, and then I will bend those things like circus animals. And the first thing that that tree will do to show me how it feels about that is it will back bud like nobody's business. So if I've got some little seedling, some little stick with a pom pom on top, and I wrap a hard spiral of wrap around it, and then I take that and I wrap it around a popsicle stick until it is just absolutely twisted like a spring, I can get some really great motion, and it's going to reward me by doing a couple of things. It's going to spread out really fat, really fast between those wires, and it's going to back bud, which is we're usually talking about, like I said, a stick with a pom pom on the end. So back buds are a great thing at this stage in the game. So that's how I really love to make little canyon trees, and I just can throw them in a little peanut, little peanut sized mame pots, and we just take those to town and get rolling. Well, when it comes, so the first time I did that, I loved that little tree. And I looked at it and I watched it and I go, the wires are starting to dig in, but they're starting to look really good. This would be a good time to remove those wires. So I removed the wires and I saw how much trenching had occurred on that trunk. It was deep. And I knew that because the wires were almost even with the side of the bark. It had swollen up that much, but so had the trunk swollen up that much. We had gotten a lot of girth. So when I removed those wires, one, it took part of the layer of the cambium that was underneath it. So I had to go back through with cut paste and fill that trench. And two, the tree felt bobblehead, weak and flimsy. That wire that had caused it to puff up so much. But on either side of that wire, there were places where that tree had gotten ghastly thin. And I just greatly weakened that tree by removing that wire. In 45 minutes before we had ever done that show, it was one of my top flight little trees. And by removing the wire, I wrecked it. And I went, I see now why people leave them on there. So I went back and started looking, and I found where it wasn't just people who didn't know what they were doing, and it wasn't lazy people, and it wasn't people who didn't have a conscience, and it wasn't people, who don't use deodorant or otherwise are unthoughtly or thoughtless clothes. It was a very tried and true method for doing Japanese black pines. And when it comes to those little mames, I was looking at that and going, well, here we go. I think on most of these, I'll probably end up leaving in most of that wire. And that's kind of where we are on some of them. Now, on a couple of them, I was a little, I was a little holding back on it. We did a little less design going on, so we could do something that was a little bit more sustainable. But then again, I don't think it's necessarily our most dramatic work. And I think whenever you get that many bends out of something that small, it's kind of like theater. Um, Somebody who is on a commercial or on a film or something will have makeup that is just certain pitch and it is done a certain way, and in between everything, people will rush in and make sure that this is hair is out of the way and this and that and this is this other. But when it comes to but on the long run, what we want is sustainability. We want something that we can maintain, and that's kind of how I go with leaving the wires in the trunk. It's more something that in the long run, and the other side to it is where in theater, if you were looking down at an actor and you were multiple floors above, you would see that they don't have this subtle makeup on. They have heavy, 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 heavy makeup so that the guys on the top row can see if they're laughing or crying. And that's kind of the idea, I think, between mames. The smaller you get, the more dramatic you can get, the better. And that's just my take on design, which is not really wiring. It's just kind of what I think of when it comes to taking little pine trees and making circus animals out of them. And we've had really good luck with that. We've had really bad luck with some other facets of growing trees up here. 4 floors up, and when we have 90 degrees, it's 90 plus. So that has taken us out. But I don't really think our tree folding is to blame for that. Uh, Other things that I have done, and I guess I can combine these two. And I've had somebody else mention this before. Sometimes, if you've got a tree and it's in development, and we're not talking show quality wiring, you're not going to even put it in the local bonsai show. If this part of the tree is doing fine, but you need to anchor it with this to get this bend, don't worry about how many reps you have here. Don't worry about doing great work if all you're going to do is try to pull some motion into this one branch, right? If you are wanting to wire this branch and you're wanting to wire this branch, and these end up being your two branches, it's okay to waste your loops to get from here to there. Don't waste the wire. The wire police are not going to come around and judge you. Also, if you do a bend and you look back and you go, that's not the way I was taught to do that, but it's doing what you intended to do, then stay with that. There's two reasons. One, you'll look at that ugly mess until it's time to take it off. Two, you're more likely to really damage something taking something off. It seems I have had this happen on more than one occasion. I would be too anal about something, look at it and go, I don't like that wiring job. I don't want to look at that. And I would back it off and try to do it back right, only to discover that I had wore that particular plant material out, going on again, going on and off again with that wire. I've seen that be a thing. So if you get a wire on it and you're not happy with your aesthetics, but it's doing what you wanted to with the tree, I would say strongly consider going with that if it's not going into a bonsai show, or yeah, if it's not going into a bonsai show, even if you have, yeah, that's that's what I would say in regards to that. Other than that, wiring is a really good way to get some really nice shapes out of trees. They started doing it in Japan. I would have guessed that they hadn't been doing it that long. I would have guessed as a one time electrician that it probably, I don't know, had something to do with the advent of electricity. Not so. They've had wire for a long time. They've been using wire as cables, and they've been using wire as jewelry for thousands of years. So apparently they had been doing that to trees too, from various and sundry ways. In some places, you see people will train their bonsai trees, but instead of doing guy wires, they will put a guy wire on it, but instead of tying it to something, they will take automotive parts and hang from those. So you'll see a big Empire pine tree sitting there with the brake hub hanging off of it. Or, I think I've seen that in India and places where people would take these big ficus, these big, huge, beautiful Empire bonsai trees, and then they would have what looked like really bad ornaments, and they were really just weighting down the limbs to try to get them set to where they had wanted to. That is about really all I have. All I have going. Trees that I've wired on the balcony that you see, that you know of, that you I've got wire on quite a few of our little Japanese black pines. I have styled once or twice our big ponderosas and all of our ponderosas, and I've been adding wire to our little 20-year from seed Japanese black pine the last couple of summers to bring the limbs, to bring the pads farther down, to get more light in there, which is another reason. And so there are other methods to bring in branches down, but I'll get into that in a different show. It's not wiring; it's chopping and cutting, wedge cutting and stuff. you can move branches that way as well. And it kind of gets into guy wire, but it's more wedge cutting than guy wire. So I think that would be a totally different program. Uh, Thank you all for coming out tonight, guys. It was nice to see you, and I hope that I've given some tips about wiring that are helpful. Remember, if you get these bends tighter, you'll have more success with your bends holding and the limb not snapping back. Oh yeah, also one other thing. If you're wondering whether or not a wire is a heavy gauge enough to facilitate a bend, one method would be to go up to the branch with the wire that you think might work, and see if you start bending on stuff, which bends first, the branch or the wire. In this case, this wire would make mincemeat of this branch. It would bend. So yeah, this guy would be good for that. So that's just kind of a quick guide. If you find that you've wrap a wire around a tree, and then you go to do your bend, and you find that it wasn't a heavy enough wire, go lay another wire right in there beside that. You can do that up to maybe one other time. But try not to just take a band of wires up a tree to bend a trunk, unless you're planning on sprouting those one off to this branch, one off to that branch, and then one off to this branch. And in which case, bravo, that's really cool looking when people do that. And then practice, practice, practice on twigs and stuff that you can cut, or on clippings. That way you can get really good at taking very fine wire and very, very fine wire and doing very fine work on those, and see how well you can get at taking those all the way out to the end. There were some other things we could have discussed, like, for instance, people have taken chopsticks before and wrapped a branch around the chopstick, and then take a second chopstick and lay that on the other side of the branch, and then tie those together with cord. And that would be a way that people who couldn't afford wire or were opposed to wire could get natural, bends out of a tree just by using two chopsticks and a length of rope. Okay, I think that's pretty much my notes tonight on wiring. If you have any questions, be sure to ask. Um, I appreciate you. Frida appreciates you. Our next drop will be in a few minutes when I do the final touches on a video that we did out in the soggy balcony today. We had quite a bit of rain today. It's been raining for most of the week here, and today we had a lot of wind, a lot of 25-mile-an-hour winds, gusts, and I spent a lot of time inside the house just looking out of the window going, ick. It's just about stripped the bald cypress bare, which they were already, ready to go anyway. But I look forward to doing that. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching.